I love working with my hands, but I also enjoy a nice bourbon every once in a while. I got real tired of having all the bottles sitting on top of my refrigerator and decided to build the bourbon wall. Stay tuned to see how I built it. I wanted an area where I could keep all of the alcohol and glassware in one space, but I also wanted some display room for mementos and whatnot. I live in an early 1900s farmhouse, so the aesthetic of this area needed to fit within the house and future renovation plans. So with all of that in mind, I sat down and started laying it out. For the carcasses of the cabinets, I knew I was going to use Baltic birch. I've used it a lot in the past. It's very stable and I enjoy working with it. I also knew it was going to end up being painted, so it was a no-brainer. I've really come to rely on the Festool track system. It's incredibly versatile. I can use it with the circular saw, routers, even a jigsaw, and it makes my work that much more accurate, and it's very easy to expand. When I'm buying tools, I'm looking for accuracy, dependability, and ease of use. The Kapex is one of those tools that is just fun to use. I rely on the twin laser system constantly, and what I love about that is the fact that it always shows you your waste. Whether you're working on the right side of it or the left side of it, you always know where your waste cut's going to be because you have that twin laser reference for your curve. It makes it just pure fun to use. For the base cabinets, I built it using a riser system. The floors in my house are very uneven, and I thought it would be much easier for me to build base cabinets and then independent risers so that I could install the risers first, get those leveled and plumb, and then build on top of that. So for the risers, I needed some very rigid nailing strips across the top of it because that's what's going to hold the base cabinets in place. When I put those risers in, I wasn't able to use blind mortise with the domino, so I actually just increased the depth of the cut on the domino and made them through mortises. I wasn't concerned about seeing the dominoes on the exterior side because I knew that trim would be going over that. And it worked out great because I get the strength of the domino and the ease of assembly. I needed to cut the base trim at an angle to compensate for the unevenness of the floors in my house. The track saw really shined at this because I just took a couple measurements, transferred it over to my wood, and then set the track at an angle and made my cut. It was very accurate and much quicker than doing it freehand. For the base trim on these cabinets, I used the Domino and it worked out great. I was able to make all my cuts and assemble it as one unit. The Dominoes helped keep everything nice and tight and perfectly square. I used pine for all the trim because this cabinet was going to be painted. For the face frame, I took rough measurements, cut my trim pieces out, and then went up to the house and actually sort of referenced everything out on site to the individual cabinets, because again, the walls aren't plumbed. So for one side, the right side of this unit, it wasn't a big deal, but on the left side where I was referencing a wall, I knew I was going to have to scribe the left side of the face frame, so I sort of had to build it all on site that way. Normally I'd like to build the face frame in the shop with the cabinets and then attach the whole thing, but in this situation I sort of had to do it the way I did it to get the best results at the end of the day. Again, using the Domino made it super easy because I could cut Domino joints in the house and know that the ones I cut in the shop, everything was going to match up. And I just used little hash marks for reference points on where I was placing those dominoes. To finish off the face frames, I took the small trim router with a little chamfer bit and just knocked the edges off on the inside and the outside. Just makes it a little easier and nicer on the eyes and to touch. The middle section of the wall space was really an area that I could add a lot of design detail to. Doing something other than just a painted surface would bring a lot of visual value. And Shiplap is what I ended up using in here, and I'm glad I did because it adds a lot to it visually. Now for finishing the Shiplap, I wanted to char it, give it a burnt look to it, and then put a flat on top of that. And I happened to be at the store and saw some charring agent in a stained format, and I'd never used it before and thought, what the heck, I'll try it. And it worked out great. It was a way easier process than torching everything up. Even as much as I like to use torches, it went a lot faster. So I think it looks great, and I'm happy I went with that. When I was setting the lower section of Shiplap, we actually had a power outage in Detroit that lasted a few days. So I just used a hammer and a nail set and went about it the traditional way. It was sort of fun actually getting back to using a hammer and a trim set. In the past, when I've made drawers for cabinets, I tend to use a locking rabbet joint. This time around, I used dominoes to assemble the cabinet drawers, and honestly, I found it super easy and very strong. It's definitely something I'm going to continue doing down the road. Just made things a lot easier and faster. For the inside of the drawers, I use General Finishes top coat. I just like the look of it against the black paint. For the doors, I decided to use 2-panel, rail and style. I used half lap for the joints, and then for the middle style, I used a domino to locate. I also cut an inside bevel all the way around the edges, and once I was done routing that, because you have to do that before the panels go in, so you sort of have to guess where to start and stop that a little bit, I went in with a chisel and just cleaned up the corners to get a nice clean tight look. One of the things I knew up front was the fact that I was going to use live edge for the countertop in this piece. The countertop really drove a lot of decision making, so that was probably the first thing I bought for this project was the slab. I knew I wanted to use live edge, but I also didn't want it really thick because I was afraid that it was going to overpower the look of the piece. So I went with a thinner piece of live edge. I actually had it milled down to right around 4/4. And I also knew that I was going to use live edge for floating shelves, but early on I wasn't entirely set on how I was going to mount those. I've done it a few different ways. With all of that information, I went and found myself a piece of live edge elm to use. The Jigsaw is another one of those tools that I really enjoy using. The Festool Jigsaw has a strobe light feature built into it, so it's in line with the speed you're cutting. The faster you're cutting, the faster the strobe's going. And what that allows is for you to be able to see the blade and the cut line at the same time. It makes it very accurate and easy to use. For the countertop, I used Aqua Coat grain filler and then a General Finishes top coat. And I also used the Aqua Coat grain filler on the cabinet sides before I painted them, just to help reduce some of that grain. There's a few things I've learned with building cabinets. One, I tend to use a router to cut all my dados and my rabbets in one single piece. So what I do is I take my measurements from my cabinetry and I oversize the plywood just a little bit. I'll set up the track saw, route all my dados, cut all the rabbets, all my edge work, get all that out of the way. And then once that's done, I take that single piece and then I rip out the sides. This makes it a lot easier to do and a lot more accurate. It's worked out very well, and I've done it for probably the last couple sets of cabinets I've built. I wanted to use LED lighting in the upper cabinets, but I also wanted to use wooden shelves. So I knew I was going to have lights on every individual shelf. I found the thinnest lights that I could on Amazon, and then once those came in, I took some measurements and I used a 2.5-inch Forstner bit to recess little pockets, and then followed up with the router to cut little grooves in for the wiring. In the back of the cabinets, I drilled a hole for the wires to go through, and then used some trim at the very end to overlap that hole so it would look good at the end. I love the attachments and versatility of the drill system that Festool has. You know, it's almost like a little transformer in your toolbox, because you've got an angle adapter, you've got eccentric adapters, you've got quick draw chucks for it, and you've got standard chucks for it. It makes it super easy to work in very tight spaces. And the light on the drill makes it even that much better. You can actually see what you're doing when you're in the back of the cabinet. I had a piece of maple at the shop and I wanted to use live edge for the upper section of the drawer faces. It was super easy. I cut it down to length on the Kapex and then just started milling it out from there. I ended up around 3/4, which is what I wanted. That's what I had planned on. At the end of the day, it's just nice and clean and has a very natural look to it. For the black paint, I just used a Behr all-in-one. It's got a primer and paint. It went on pretty smooth and it's got a really nice low sheen to it. For the center section, I used some perforated metal for the face screen, and that metal's black. And then behind it, I have this silver fabric stuff I got at the fabric store. I really don't know what it's used for. It's super see-through, but it worked great for this purpose of, you know, breaking your visual but still giving you some depth. I wouldn't make a dress out of the fabric though. Super see-through for a dress. The floating shelves was something I was going to do from my initial designs. In the past when I've done them, they're usually much thicker, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and I make the hardware over at the motorcycle shop and it's comprised of metal. My concern with using metal hardware on these shelves is that these shelves are a lot thinner. They're only 3/4 of an inch thick, and I was concerned that the metal backing plate wouldn't have enough material there to help distribute the load and keep the shelf from sagging over time. So I happened to see a buddy of mine, Ronnie Fulton. He did a floating shelf using dominoes, and I used the same exact technique. I cut the shelves to the shape that I wanted them to be and then finished them off. I dominoed mortise pockets in the shelf, 3 of them in each one, and then I took it on my table saw and cut it off at a 45-degree angle. So now I have a small section for the back that actually gets mounted on the wall, and then the shelf itself, which slides over the dominoes. The dominoes stick out far enough and they're big enough to hold the load. Now this was a really easy way to hang floating shelves and super easy to install. Something I'm going to keep in mind for the future.